Hello, I'm Dr. Jane McCartney. I'm a chartered psychologist and I'm absolutely fascinated by anything human behaviour, but particularly criminal behaviour. What's behind it? What is in somebody's background that they can commit a crime, they can kill? They can do that, whereas most of us wouldn't. In this episode, I'm going to look at the case of Kim Edwards and Lucas Markham, who together would kill Katie Edwards and Liz Edwards, Kim's mother and sister. They would together become the youngest British couple to be tried and convicted of murder. Before I start, if I could please ask you to like, subscribe, share, and feel free to make any comments below. They're always interesting to read.
On the 12th of April 2016, in Spalding in Lincolnshire in the UK, a 14-year-old teenager, Lucas Markham, would walk the 30 minutes to his girlfriend's house. She would let him in via the bathroom window, and within a few short moments, he had stabbed both her mother and her younger sister to death. This is the story of the teenage murderers Lucas Markham and Kim Edwards. Edwards and Markham would meet at school. Seemingly, she would form an instant attraction to him when she saw him misbehaving. Apparently, he had thrown a chair across a classroom in anger, and this appealed to Kim. Kim Edwards, although 14, had led a long and troubled life. Her father was seemingly a drug addict, and he was brutal and abusive towards her mother. They had fled his brutality and at some point lived in a caravan. Her mother, and her younger sister Katie. And seemingly there had been an incident with her mother over an argument over watching television of all things that resulted in her mother abusing her and referring herself to social services. This would result in both girls being placed in temporary foster care, but it would lay the seed for the foundation of the brutal murder that would happen some 7 or 8 years later. For Kim Edwards believed that her mother was unattached to her, didn't care about her, and when this was proved in her head, when she banned Kim from seeing Lucas Markham after their relationship became quickly intense and quickly sexual, the only answer, as far as Kim Edwards was concerned, was to get rid of her mother. She would justify the murder of her younger sister Katie of not putting her, Katie, through the horror of knowing what Kim had orchestrated, inasmuch as she had killed their mother. Only too willing to do his girlfriend's bidding, Markham came armed, ready, and mentally equipped to murder both his girlfriend's mother and his girlfriend's sister. And so it was that Kim Edwards and Markham would go down in UK history as the youngest pair of double killers. Markham would have to come in via the bathroom window because he had been banned from the house. Kim's mother, Elizabeth, known as Liz, was scared of him. She had seen the temper that Kim had found so attractive on that first meeting, and she was scared of him. She herself had come from an abusive relationship. She knew the signs, and she wanted more for her daughter. Liz Edwards would describe Markham as a time bomb waiting to go off. But Kim wasn't about to listen. She was completely enthralled with Markham and would spend all of her time with him. Apparently, after the chair incident, Markham learnt about Kim Edwards' obsession with him, because apparently that's what it was, and he contacted her via social media, and soon the pair would become inseparable, developing what was described in court as a very intense but very toxic relationship. Liz Edwards would become quickly concerned about Markham, who at that point had been expelled from school, about him becoming a bad influence on Kim, and would try and keep them apart. There was a point where they ran away together. They were found 6 days later, living in a tent, and duly returned to their respective family homes. And when we talk about a family, although from a troubled background herself, Liz tried the best for her children, even going to the lengths of reporting herself when she thought she could be a potential danger to her daughters. She wanted the best for them, but this would only underlie what Kim always suspected, that her mother preferred her younger sister. And seemingly Katie was an easier child. Kim was quite volatile. From the outset of her young life, Kim would have been exposed to violence, arguments, her father's drug-taking, and what would any young child, forming their own way in the world, make of that? She would have seen violence perpetuated on her mother. To her, perhaps, that was a way of getting what you wanted. She would have seen her father do it. So she probably tried it herself. But as a youngster, as a toddler, she had to be disciplined and boundaried. And if a couple of years later she saw her sister not receiving the same punishment that she perceived that she received, started to engender and build up this loathing and resentfulness and this hate towards not only her mother, but also towards her sister. Why couldn't her sister be a little bit more like her? Why couldn't she be undisciplined? Why couldn't she fly off the handle? Why couldn't she get told off like I get told off all the time? Would have undoubtedly been Kim's thoughts. Not so different from a lot of teenagers, you could argue, but the difference in Kim Edwards' life was Lucas Markham. For he himself had come from a troubled background. His mother had died when he was 5 from cancer, and although obviously nobody's fault, he would have had a sense of rejection and abandonment. There are some people that believe even if their parents leave them for whatever reason, through illness, through mental health, they have a choice in that, and they have chosen to leave them. And therefore, the legacy of that is huge and cannot be overlooked. Add to the absolute tragic event in his life, and also he lost his father in a tragic way. His father, Warren Free, had gone outside of the family home to remonstrate with a gang of 6 teenagers, including 2 girls, who were damaging their property. An altercation ensued, and he ended up dead. The 6 were put on trial and ultimately found not guilty of manslaughter. The message that young Lucas Markham would have got from that was, you can kill somebody and you can get away with it. Throughout his young life, including his school life, Markham was known as a troubled child. He would have anger issues, he would throw things, he would end up in the behavioural unit at his school. Perhaps the authorities just seemingly gave up on him, which from time to time they do, if they don't feel that they're making any progress with the child. Tragic as it is, sometimes it's just a paper exercise. And equally as important as he was in Kim Edwards' life, she was just important to him. Here, for the first time, he had a person that didn't judge him, that didn't criticise him, that wanted to be with him. For the first time in his life, he could say that he had what he would consider to be a healthy relationship. And yet, at their very young age of early teens, they were engaging sexually. They were spending all of their time with each other, and this worried Kim's mum, Liz. She wanted the best for her daughter, and as I said, she didn't want to see a repeat of the relationships that she'd had in her past, and she was scared of him. She was scared of his outbursts that would happen if he wasn't getting his own way at home even. So she banned her daughter from seeing him, and they would meet up outside of the home. And between their immaturity and their fantasy and idolisation of what they were going to do about their seemingly intractable situation, that they weren't allowed to see each other, to them there was only one answer. Liz had to be got rid of, and permanently. And so it was apparently that the pair would plot what they were going to do to Liz and younger sister Katie in a local MacDonald's. Arming himself with the knife that he was going to kill Liz Edwards with, and also a knife that, as the agreement was, that Kim was going to kill her younger sister, Markham would walk the 30 minutes to the Edwards household. As per their murderous plot, Kim would let him in through the bathroom window, and as this was in the middle of the night, both Liz and Katie were asleep. They made easy prey. Kim would stay outside the room while Markham would go in and stab Liz Edwards in the neck. He would also place a pillow over her head and lay his entire weight on top. Hearing the noises inside, Kim Edwards would go in, and as she would say in her police interviews later on, I was checking to see if he was okay. Realising what they had done, in their twisted logic, they knew that they had to also kill Katie. The plan had been that Kim was going to do this, but seemingly she had a panic attack, and Markham took the lead. Kim didn't go inside when she heard the dreadful noises coming from her younger sister's bedroom. After killing both Liz and Katie, the pair would have a bath together. They would go downstairs, they would watch videos and eat ice cream and have sex. A few days later, when the school was alerted that neither Katie or Kim had attended, the police were called, and Markham's aunt had reported him missing. The police went round to the Edwards family home. They knocked on the door, and when Markham opened it, they asked where the Edwards family were. Markham seemingly said, "You better go and take a look." And the dead bodies of Katie and Liz Edwards would be found. During the subsequent police interviews, Markham would admit that he said to Kim, "I wish I could kill them." She said jokingly, "Yes." But then she realised I was serious, and she started being serious herself. It was a fantasy that they believed would keep them together. Ultimately, when sentenced to 17 years each, it was the thing that would drive them apart. Kim Edwards would say in her interviews, killing her mum was getting rid of the only problem I could see. She would say that they never really got on. And afterwards, I thought it would be better if my sister were to die too. I wasn't killing my sister out of anger like I was my mum. And I miss her, my sister. But I was excited about killing my mum. I was looking forward to it. She was a problem, and this would be getting rid of the problem. The couple seemingly had planned to take their own lives after the murder, but Kim didn't want to go through with it. In their interviews, apparently, neither Kim Edwards or Lucas Markham showed any emotion or remorse over the double killing. When asked how she felt about the murder, Edwards would say, "I was okay with it." The fact that it happened so quickly gave me a kind of peace of mind because it wasn't like torture or anything. And when she was asked why she wanted to murder her mum, she said, "Ever since I was young, I never got on with my mum. I knew that she favoured my sister more than me. Even though she said she didn't, I knew she was lying." And she was justifying not only her behaviour and the plans of that night, she was justifying what she wanted to believe. She wanted to believe that her mum disliked her and liked her younger, easier sister over her, because ultimately that's the reason for killing her. It's a very black and white, childlike way of looking at a problem. You have a problem, you get rid of the problem, rather than having anybody to discuss this with, not obviously the murder of her mother, but just discussing how she was feeling. And perhaps she had taken this to a wider family or her mother before and got short shrift. We don't know. We're only getting ever one side of the story about what happened in that family dynamics. And if you think about it as being like a triangle, this is like the absolute classic drama triangle where you have three people or 3 points. You have somebody that's the victim, you have somebody that is the persecutor, and you have somebody that is the rescuer. And these roles aren't exclusive to each other. So Kim Edwards, as far as she was always concerned, anything to do with her mother, she was the victim. She was the victim of her mother, and her mother was always the persecutor. And in a classic triangle, a third person, in this case, this is where Markham comes in, he is the rescuer. And that's how Kim would have seen him, that he was rescuing her from the tyranny, the terror, the dissatisfaction of the relationship that she had with her mother. And it's a really sad case, because I'm sure this must have come up at some point in her schooling, at least, even with the social services, that this is a child that would have needed to talk about how she felt and have a third party, a neutral, adult, mature third party, explain to her that it wasn't quite like that. At some point, Kim had been referred to the CMHT, the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Team. This was after she had left a suicide note, seemingly. But she was quickly assessed to have no mental health problems, and although the family relationship was acknowledged as not being very good, she didn't have any further appointments. But instead, because perhaps it was just easier, maybe she just didn't engage with the services, it was just so much easier to get into the echo chamber of believing what she believed with Lucas Markham. And if we think about his background, that he has come from that sense of, as I said before, of abandonment, of rejection. His mum died through nobody's fault, but it is still maternal abandonment and rejection. And if he didn't have anybody there to be able to take that to hold that with, to be able to process that with, and I'm not reading anything that was particularly the case in his young years, and then add to the fact that his father died in such terrible circumstances as well, which just gave him the message that you can kill and you can get away with it. So this is where you have the two sides. You have Kim Edwards desperate to get rid of her mother, and you have Lucas Markham, who on the other side of that would be desperate to have his mother there. But equally, as far as he was concerned, his mother left him. She died. She didn't do anything to not die. And that's how a young, immature, developing emotional brain would see that. They would see that this important person in my life has just left me. I understand the nuts and bolts. She was ill and she left, but she still left me. And you have this bizarre kind of drama developing. You have Kim Edwards, who wants to get rid of her mum. You have Lewis Markham, who would like his mum there, but that resentment that he holds towards her is then pushed towards the mum that is there, Kim Edwards' mum. And then if you add that to the situation of him losing his dad as well, his sense of self, his sense of importance, his sense of self-worth would have been at an all-time low. And then into his life came Kim Edwards, who seemingly worshipped him, adored him, thought nothing of his past being a bad thing and his sense of self being low. She just wanted to be with him, and he just wanted to be with her. And in their childish way, they would have justified one another's thoughts, one another's ideas about what they could do about their situation. And it would result in this terrible tragedy of him killing her mother on her behalf and him killing her sister, again, on Kim Edwards' behalf, but because she thought it was justified. She didn't want her younger sister to have the legacy and the belief that the pair of them would kill their mother. It's clearly demonstrated in their actions and what they did afterwards that they never particularly thought through the consequences of what was going to happen, which is typical of 14-year-olds. They have radar personalities. They can only think about what is in front of them at the time. There is a problem that is keeping us apart in front of us at the time, so therefore we get rid of the problem. That's Liz. And because of the sadness and the repercussions that might happen to my younger sister, let's get rid of her as well. It's as simple as that. But they couldn't think beyond the killing. Some talk about, oh, let's kill ourselves. It was probably never really considered and really thought about. So instead, what do? We'll sit around and we'll indulge ourselves. What went on in that house for those couple of days before the police came round after they were alerted, goodness only knows. Was there a sense of fear, of remorse, of sadness at being reminded that just up the stairs are the bodies of my family? I'm thinking from the point of view of Kim Edwards here. And again, maybe if there was, and she said, no, we've got to call the police, we've got to do something about this, you would have had Lucas Markham saying, no, we don't want to do anything about that because I'm the one that killed them, so I'll get into trouble. And then perhaps if it flipped and he kind of felt some element of guilt or understanding of what he had done, she would have probably then said, no, let's not call the police because, again, you'll get into trouble and then I'll get into trouble because it is my mum and sister that have been murdered and they might look into me. So over those few days, they talked about a lot about exactly what went on just after the killing, the bathing, the having the videos and ice cream, etc., etc. But they would have probably had a few days of both of them, not together, because otherwise the authorities would have been called, but both of them taking care of what they believed, taking care of their future, such as we don't call the police. But they never left. They just waited for the police to come around and were both subsequently arrested. They would have known that's what would have happened, but they probably didn't actually realise the consequences, the full and utter consequences of their actions, which was to both be tried for murder and both be found guilty of that murder and sentenced to over 17 years in prison, the pair of them. They'll come out when they were 15, so they'll come out when they're in their early 30s, potentially. Will they spend time together? Will they get back together? Do they communicate with each other? I should think within a young offenders institute, and I've worked with young offenders, this would be very limited, if allowed at all. I very much doubt that they would allow communication between each other for their own sake, and it might be that when they get to the age of 18 they could challenge this as being adults. I don't know, that's yet to come. It'll be interesting to see what happens, and undoubtedly there'll be some solicitor somewhere that's happy to take on the case, as this contravenes their human rights to be able to talk to each other. But that's in the future, that's me speculating about that. But it's just interesting about what would happen. So they would have gone off to single-sex young offenders institutes, and it will be interesting to see what they come out as. And it might be that they're so young when they are potentially released that they may get pseudo-identities, I don't know, and it as in a way also, so not to get the publicity, but also to keep them apart from each other, because there is no doubt, even at their tender ages of 13, 14 when they did the killings, 13 when they met, that there is a toxicity and an encouragement from each other that, even though it was directed at one person alone, it couldn't be guaranteed that they wouldn't believe the same thing again. So it'll be an interesting future for them, and they have the future, and that's the thing about the pair of them. It may have been something that started as an immature fantasy to get rid of the problem that was keeping us apart, but then turned into something more tragic and murderous. But they do have a future, unlike especially Katie, who was 13 when she died. And it's very interesting that she was 13 when she died and Kim Edwards was 14 when the murders took place. So there's only a year, 18 months at the very most, if we stretch out the 2 ages, 2 years between them. So there's just a very, very short time between them. And often what happens within that dynamic and the belief of the older child who has been problematic to her mum, with her discipline, with her temper, of all the things that Kim was potentially to her mother, that troubled girl. And then she is replaced by a, if you like, what we would call a golden child. Katie was easy. It was easy for her mum to get on with her. She didn't have the hassle of trying to get her to go to school, to do her homework, to tidy up her room, to do all the teenagey things that if there's more than one of you, there is always that kind of good girl, bad girl routine. Usually and I've spoken about this before, this happens the other way around. The older child is the golden child, the good child, and then the younger one comes along and sees that there's no role in inverted commas for them as the good child, so they kind of become the black sheep of the family. That's the usual way of it around. But it's not unheard of, and I've said this before as well, for the older one to be the one that's troubled and hard to reason with, hard to discipline. And of course the younger one comes along and goes, great, that role's still available, I'll take the role as being the good girl. And I imagine that's what would have happened. And if you're just an easier person that doesn't cause stress and hassle to get on with, of course Liz, their mother, would have found it easier to have been around and in the company of Katie, the younger child. But for the maturing, or the slowly maturing but fantasising Kim, that would have been excuse the analogy, but a dagger in her own heart. Not only has she witnessed violence and abuse towards her mother from her father, but she would have then perceived this as a complete rejection of her by her mother, because her mother finds her younger sister easier to deal with. And then we have the toxicity of her meeting Lucas Markham, who accepts her for all her perceived flaws. I'm the useless one, I'm the ugly one, I'm the troublesome one, and he accepts all that. And equally, Kim Edwards accepts him with all of his so-called flaws as well. His abandonment issues, his father dying in such a way, being kind of fostered around, pushed from pillar to post, not really, in his eyes, ever being wanted. And suddenly in his life, he has this person in Kim Edwards who accepts him, who wants him in a social way, in a familiar way, even in a sexual way. She wants him and accepts him just exactly as he is. And there was something standing in the way of that. A psychiatrist that was asked to assess Kim Edwards for the defence concluded that she had potentially an adjustment disorder and long-standing attachment issues as the result of a strained relationship with her mother. Seemingly, the pinch point had come when, a couple of days before the murder, Liz Edwards had told Kim in a row that she would turn out just like her own father. The man that had abused her, Liz, and left the family when Kim was just 2 years old and Katie was a baby. And following that argument, Kim Edwards had gone to Lucas Markham's house. The pair of them had barricaded themselves into his bedroom and refused to come out. Now, this was a house that he shared with a couple of his siblings at an aunt's house. Obviously, he was orphaned at this point. And when Kim Edwards had returned home, she'd found that her mother had seemingly bagged up some of her possessions and given others to her younger sister. And that was at the point that she decided that she did not belong to the family. This tried and troubled relationship was over. She did not belong, and her mother had to be got rid of. That's why Markham was so quick to kill, because he wasn't going to risk not having Kim Edwards in his life, because she's the only person, as far as he's concerned, that accepted him, that loved him, that wanted him, that needed him, that loved him. And he wasn't going to let his girlfriend's mother stand in the way of that. That's why the killing to him came so easily, because it was 100% justified. And if we look at Kim Edwards in her interviews, apparently she was calm, she would show no remorse. It was, again, a lack of maturation, but you have this echo chamber, as I've said before, you have this echo chamber of these two people saying, my mum's wrong. Yes, your mum's wrong. We need to get rid of her. Yes, we'll get rid of her. Your mum was wrong to leave you. Your dad was wrong to go outside and remonstrate with these people. He left you too. That was wrong. Yes, that was wrong. And you just kind of have this toxic build-up of their past experiences that culminated in this dreadful night where they fantasized, first of all, and then afterwards justified the killing of the person that was, for them, standing in the way of their future and their relationship. And of course, the irony of it is That's exactly what's happened, because they are in separate young offenders institutes and prisons for the next at least 15 years of their lives. And what's also interesting about this case, because they were so young, normally they would have been afforded the lack of publicity by the courts, but the judge has ruled that there was such a strong public interest that the full facts of this case were to be known, meaning that Lucas Markham and Kim Edwards were named, and their names will be out there for history in perpetuity about the murder of Liz and Katie. That was the story of Kim Edwards and Lucas Markham, who killed Liz and Katie Edwards. And, as ever, let's just please take just a few moments to think about the victims in this. It could be argued that Kim Edwards and Lucas Markham are victims as well, but let's focus on Liz and Katie. Liz was 49 when she died, and Katie was just 13.
Thanks ever so much for listening, and I hope you found my analysis interesting. If I could again please ask you to like, subscribe, share, and put some comments below. They're always really fascinating to read, to see what people think about certain cases and certain individuals. And until next time, thanks ever so much, and goodbye.